Right. Thanks for coming today. We're happy to meet with you guys for the next 4 hours. As per the agenda, we're just going to get started on any housekeeping things. We don't necessarily have any housekeeping other than the refrigerators, the restrooms. Your guys' caucus room seems to be working better than last time, so we'll stick with that one instead of shifting. Okay. Did you have any other housekeeping things?
No, I don't.
Okay, so then we'll start with BSD's exchange of whatever order you want to go in.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Oh, that's a good. So the date changes that you and I have been communicating about with regards to April 10th.
Yeah,
And June 10th, we accept those.
thank you.
So for the record.
And I put those down at the bottom of the agenda for future dates, just so that they were in paper.
And then
Otherwise I'll forget.
Okay,
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Sure. So scheduled April 18th to April 10th, we called before here at your offices here in BEA.
Mhm.
The next one that was rescheduled was June 13th and scheduled to June 10th, 4 to 8 here at BEA offices. And then for our next meeting that we'll meet with our session 4, we'll be able to talk to Fred Beaverton.
Perfect, thank you. We
All
concur.
right, well, we'll get started and then I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Susan for Article 4.
Thank you. Did you pass out?
There you go.
I do still encourage folks to speak loudly so the mics can't pick you up.
Yeah. Looks like Article 4.
Backtrack. Undo.
That's a page 2.
Does anybody have anything other than Article 4?
An appendix?
Oh,
Yes, we do.
yeah. No, oh, you guys all have, no, stop.
Appendix.
We have Appendix B.
Are we not supposed to have appendix B?
Yes, that's what that way. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
This is page 1 and this is page 2, so these are two separate ones. Okay.
You should have Article 4, page 1 of Appendix B. That's the full 4.
What are you missing?
They're missing page 1.
Page 1 appendix B, we're missing. And there's Appendix 3. Yeah, I was in color. One, I'll come to sit here. Wait. It's true. Yeah. We already.
We'll take the extra.
Yeah.
It's kind of where they're meeting.
I love it. You want
Everybody good? Okay, thank you.
All right, great. So this is our counter proposal for Article 4. I'll just walk you through some of the highlights. You had previously picked up our suggestion on the first page to exchange targets for goals. So if we go to the second page.
Before we move on to the second page, you had proposed a change in A1B. And that goes along with the just cause conversation that we had last time. Our preference that we have those actions go through our fair dismissal process as opposed to the just cause arbitration. So this is same rationale or same topic, just appears twice. So I just didn't want to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Jump in again.
But
So on the next page, this center paragraph, this is the paragraph that speaks about the association being able to submit a grievance. And we struck through the language that we feel like is basically describing using the form. And instead, just for clarity and consistency, had that grievance would also submit the written grievance on the form contained in Appendix B. And we'll get to Appendix B in a moment. We did not make substantial changes to the content of the form, but we'll share with you why we are including it. At the bottom of page 2, we did pick up your suggestion to move the timeline from 20 to 30 days. And you'll see that again on page 3. And then if you get to page 4, your suggestion was to simplify level 1 by removing the requirement of the informal conference and going directly to a written level 1. We did accept that change. We had some back and forth with you about our interest in making sure there was a meeting. And so you'll see on the top of page 5 that we did add language. The principal or immediate supervisor shall schedule a conference to discuss the grievance within 5 days of notice from the grievance. We struck out our own addition there with informal, so I think that we just neglected to remove it, but we didn't want to use the word informal because it sounds almost like we're confusing people about the previous organization. So anyway, that new language is the principal or immediate supervisor shall schedule a conference to discuss the grievance within 5 days of notice from the grievance. So if you go back for a moment to 4, if I just go backwards 1 page, at the top of 4, we felt like we wanted to add some language to honor our mutual interest, I think, in solving things at the lowest possible level. So we just felt like it was important to put something in here as a reminder that it is in our interest to seek to resolve concerns informally before they get to that written grievance. So that's what that addition is on 8 at the top of page 4. And we go back to 5. And so I already spoke to the piece about removing the informal conference, but adding in that the supervisor will schedule a conference to discuss the grievance. And then we changed the language that the principal will have 5 days to respond in writing following the level 1 conference. For level 2, we made some changes that were really about readability and flow. So level 8 is the meeting, and we feel like the paragraph we left there describes the meeting part of that level. But then B describes the decision that follows the meeting, the following meeting. And then something that didn't make it to our print copy, but we will update it with a print copy, is directly after the additional language at the top of page 6, the language that says within 10 days of the level 2 meeting, the superintendent or designee shall provide the agreement and the association with a written statement containing the level 2 decision and the reasons thereof. Directly after that, we're adding in a third section that is entitled appeal. And so that last paragraph you see that is current contract language, that really speaks to the process by which the decision may be appealed. So it's just kind of formatting change there for clarity, in our opinion. I think the hearing procedure part, the level 3 school board, I think with our back and forth previously, I think that you accepted some of those changes, and I'm not remembering that we made any.
We withdrew a proposed change that we had in that first paragraph about the may submit a written summary of the grievance to the board. We had proposed to strike that, and you had indicated a preference to remain keep it in there, so we reinstated it.
So I don't think there are other new changes.
I think the only difference in that one was just probably a stylistic one. In the first sentence of the second paragraph, where it said the board will notify the association of the time and place of the board meeting where the grievance will be heard. You had then included by the board. We felt like that was self-evident, that it's the board notifying when it would be heard. I mean, if it needs to be in there, it can, I don't know that it matters substantively. It felt like it was kind of redundant, but I don't think we have strong feelings about it one way or the other. If you feel like that's a clarifier that should be in there, we're open to that.
And I think that in the initial proposal we made, we are the ones that added by the board, because we replaced the word board meeting with hearing. And you rejected hearing for board meetings, so we felt like, well, by the board isn't necessary. So once again, just style, not super important for content.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think that's, our counter. Do you have any questions we can answer?
Not at this time. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, I forgot. The form. Sorry, we're not quite finished. So we did print off for you Appendix B, pages 1 and 2, but the change is on page 1. And this is the language that we are suggesting in the contract in the article, that is just that encouragement to resolve things at informally through communication prior to getting to level 1. It's just a repeat. It's another opportunity for that to be something that people see and are encouraged to do. So we just inserted that at the top. We didn't make any other changes to the content or formatting of the form.
You know, the only other comment I would make about that piece is we're not necessarily intending it as a step that somebody has to go through or before they move on to agreements. It's a recognition that our preference is to have things resolved informally. It wouldn't be a mechanism where we could say, sorry, you can't file agreements because you didn't do this first. I think we just want it there so people see, hey, you know, have I tried to settle this informally? Does it feel like that type of thing that's appropriate? Maybe I feel like, no, I need to go straight to agreements. There's no, you know, punitive action if that's what you decide to do. It's just kind of an intent statement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions about the form?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to Article 6. I think it's here. You ready?
Yes, thank you.
So Article 6, the first part, we had both all agreed to strike those, and we relabeled the next paragraph A. And your proposal had related to the execution of members' assigned duties. We changed it to community members or staff members and took citizens off because we feel it's more, you know, what's for the community. Everybody's included for that. The other part that we wanted to bring to your attention is that we feel that we have to look at off-duty things in some instances, and we've had situations with maybe inappropriate texting with teacher and a student, or there may be off-duty things that impact the school, so we wanted to leave that part. And then the new B is the same. Is there anything else that our team would like to share with that, or?
No, I just would echo what Janine said, that, you know, our concern with your language about related to the execution of a member's assigned duties is, you know, how strictly are we going to apply that? Because there are things that happen off duty that we might get a complaint about that would be actionable to the district. You know, Janine gave one example. If we have somebody who's sending inappropriately personal texts to a student, but it happens off duty, and we got a complaint, that would be something the district would act on. There's some social media activity that might like disparage students or divulge student records or something like that. That would be within the school's jurisdiction as well. So it's how would that language be interpreted? Is it like, once I leave the walls of Beaverton School District, any behavior I engage in is off limits? You know, we don't agree with that broad of and I'm not saying you had said that. That's our worry about that language, is how do we define that? We agree, there needs to be some nexus to your employment with the district in order for a complaint to be relevant or actionable. There has to be some connection. And the examples that were given last time in support of this language, we agree with you. Those would not be appropriate things for the district to entertain a complaint over. But there are some things that happen, you know, outside of duty hours that unfortunately now find their way, you know, into our jurisdiction, and that is happening more and more. And so just concerned about how limiting that language. I think you'll hear some of the same discussion when, I think in one of your other articles, there was some language about personal life of folks not being appropriate concern of the district. I don't recall what article that's in. I think we'd like to have some similar conversation when we get to that language. You know, where do we draw those boundaries? Because, you know, off-duty behaviors in some instances do become the district's business. So that's why we didn't include that piece. I think other than that chunk of that sentence, I believe that the rest of the language is in agreement between the two proposals. With the exception, I think Jimmy covered this of community members instead of citizens felt more inclusive.
Thank you.
Ready to move on?
Yep, we don't have any questions at this time. Yep.
Okay, Article 7 is next. Does everyone have a copy of? Yeah,
Thank you.
so you may recall that this one was on deck last time we met, and we stopped right before sharing our counter on Article 7. So we made a change that is based upon the Article 12 proposal or that we made to you. Your proposal for Article 12 was about primarily language within the article, and ours reverts back to the MOU. So if you look at the top of page 2 of this Article 7 counter, you had language subject to the provisions of Article 12 2E. And because we are suggesting that we use the MOU, we just inserted the language about the Appendix J MOU. So it's still a reference to the same language that you were citing, I'm pretty sure, but it's just in the MOU because our proposal really relies on the MOU as the place for us to explore content changes. So that's the main change to Article 7.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
We're going on to Article 15. Right.
Did everybody have Article 13? Okay, great. Okay, I'll walk you through this one. There are a lot of different kind of moving parts in it, so bear with me. The first piece I'd address is you had proposed a new section A that we felt like got pretty prescriptive about when the board could call a layoff or enact a layoff. And I mean, I think that your examples are largely those situations where a layoff would happen, inadequate funds, substantial reduction, although, you know, not sure what substantial would be defined as, the type, discontinuance of a type of service. I think our concern here is we feel like, you know, reduction in force is one of those management rights that the board is really the board's only unilateral budget balancing tool, right? We would have to negotiate furlough days, we have to negotiate wages, et cetera. When we have to balance a budget in a time of deficit, reduction in force is really the only meaningful tool that after you cut all of what you can cut, supplies, stocking purchases and things like that, because the district's a people business, when you have a significant budget deficit, a layoff is oftentimes the only way you can really address it. I think we don't want to end up in a dispute about whether we have the right to conduct a layoff or not. So things like a substantial reduction in pupil enrollment, tends to lend itself to an argument. Well, you got, the district lost X number of students. That doesn't feel substantial enough to conduct a reduction in force. So, we are preferring the current language that just leads in with when in the judgment of the district. District is not, I don't know when the last time we had a reduction in force here is. It's not something the district takes lightly. So it's not something to do on a whim. I don't think that's been a demonstrated pattern. We did try and pick it up in the new A2, your concept of providing notice to people in advance of a layoff. We think that's appropriate. We don't think that people should be taken by surprise. What we've proposed is a 30 calendar days in advance of the effective date of the layoff. We define that as the first contracted day you would have worked had you not been laid off. So if you think about a typical layoff, which happens from 1 year to the next, the layoff is usually people finish out the school year and then they don't come back the next school year. And so we would have to give notice by essentially July-ish of that layoff, right? Because 30 days in advance of when they would have reported to work. So some date in July. If we push that too early, that notice too early, and I've had that in some contracts, what it forces is the district to issue layoff notices to far more people than actually get laid off. So let's say you had 60 days, and the district didn't know exactly what positions were being eliminated yet. It's going to issue a broad layoff notice to many, many people in order to meet its timeline. And that will get people really upset. Some people will start looking elsewhere and they may not ultimately get laid off. I've had that happen. I had one contract where it was 90 days and 1 year they issued a layoff notice to every employee in the district because they said, we don't know yet. We haven't gone through our processes yet, but we have to give notice. So to be safe, we're going to give notice to everybody. Clearly, that's not the area we want to be in. So we've used 30 days here tied to that, what we call this effective data layoff. And we've had that notice going to the association and the impacted employees. So that was our attempt to address that issue that you raised in your A2 as well. And please stop me as I'm going along if you have questions.
I just want to add that if I'm recalling correctly, I think the last time the district laid off or reduced staff in the licensed unit would have been in 12 years ago in 2012, if I'm recalling that correctly. But the point I want to make is having been in HR working with licensed staffing, we have multiple years where we have faced a reduction in force and we have gone into that mode of really trying to find spots for people and then not have the reduction. So to Brian's point about the timing being tricky sometimes and needing the time you need to process and find spots for people, that's just been our experience as well.
Thanks, Susan. Looking at page 2 of our proposal, you'll see that we still have the qualifier registered in front of nurses in that subsection E. I think we talked a little bit about that last time. Those are the only folks that are within your bargaining unit are ones designated as registered nurses. So we're not trying to change practice there, just better identify. And then we get to some pieces where we're looking to have compliance with and alignment with Oregon law. We got a statement there that reductions within each license group shall be made on the following basis, and we've added and in a manner consistent with Oregon law. That was in our original proposal. It's merely a recognition of the fact that we have statutory language that impacts us here, and so just reflecting that. In 3B, if we now start looking at the ordering of layoff, we have first temporary employees, and we've not proposed any change there, nor have you. Then we have second, reduction in force, it would impact probationary employees. But we feel like without our ad there, it's not really accurate because the probationary employee, you know, somebody in their first 3 years, you might have a second-year employee who has greater competence or greater cultural or linguistic expertise than a non-probationary employee. So it might not be the probationary person who gets laid off. It's a overly broad statement to say the next group of folks who get laid off are probationary, because that's dependent on some other factors. So that's why we have that additional language that we proposed last time. Moving on to the next page. In C, then we get into, once we move beyond probationary folks, then we talk about that the reduction in forces among the remaining folks in that license endorsement level group. But again, I think that moving on to number 4, having, and you included this as well in your proposal, the competence or cultural linguistic expertise as defined by 342.934. We picked up on that. We did agree to eliminate the reference to merit. We feel like that is a movement in your direction. Districts can bargain away the right to use merit, and this district has had a definition of merit in its contracts. From my experience, those are not, districts don't utilize merit very often because it's very subjective in conducting a reduction in force. So we're comfortable eliminating that as part of our structure. We don't want to get in disputes with the association about the order of reduction in force. Those are very difficult situations. And I've been involved in those grievances, and if it's one member against another, those are really uncomfortable grievances. So we're looking to stay out of those as well. So we're agreeable to eliminating merit and its accompanying definition there in 4A, and just relying on competence, which by law we have to include, and the cultural linguistic expertise, which again the law requires us to include, and matching up with your language about as defined by 342.934. So that should be the same. Then seniority, neither of us proposed a change in seniority, or nobody proposed a change in 4B. We have down in 5, again, the deletion of the reference to merit, and in place with competence. But we also think we need a reference there to cultural linguistic expertise if applicable, because that's talking about breaking of ties. But you only have an actual tie if you're the same in seniority, competence, and cultural linguistic expertise. And I think that may be the end to propose changes in either of our proposals. Nobody proposed any change to recall procedures, layoff benefits, school closure. I know that's a lot, but I'm happy to answer if there are any questions on that.
We don't have any questions for you at this time, Brian, but thank you.
Yep.
We are prepared to present our counter to Article 9.
Okay.
Before it comes around, I would like to speak to Article 9 a little bit. This article is, by its title, Safe Learning Environments. And the purpose of it is just that, to create safe learning environments for our students and our staff. And in this bargain and in our last bargain, we have heard your team refer to a pencil tapping reference as an example of a behavior that we might be describing that is what we're referencing to in Article 9. My team has brought today stories to give you real examples of what we're referring to that is happening in our classrooms, current examples of what is happening in our classrooms that makes Article 9 so important to us.
One of the comprehensive high schools has 3 years of climate meeting notes with staff asking for an actionable plan to address the chronic tardy absenteeism in the building. There has been no workable plan instituted by the administration in this time. This has led students to not being held responsible to be in class, which is denying them learning opportunities and placing them in unsafe situations. This year, a group of female identified students have started congregating in bathrooms instead of going to class. At times, there were up to 20 girls in a bathroom, which has made other students feel unsafe trying to use the facilities. The admin's response was to remove the girls and lock the bathrooms, prohibiting anyone access, which is a health and safety issue. BSD took action in the name of safety to address attendance by changing the policy to say that we have to mark a student present if they show up at any point during the class period, even if for only 1 minute. These inconsistent or non-existent policies are putting our students in dangerous situations and keeping them from learning opportunities while increasing the staff workload to get the bevy of absent students caught up.
Additionally, this one is to highlight the need for consistent policy, the lack of consequences, and reentry conversations. This comes from one of our middle schools. So there were 3 students skipping class, and a teacher on their plan was in the hallway and asked where these students were supposed to be. The response was, I don't remember what class I'm supposed to be in. So the teacher said, well, let's go to the office to see if we can find out what class you should be in. One of the students ran away and hid in a bathroom. The staff member continued moving towards the office with the other students, and on the way a miscommunication took place. And one of the students reacted very violently, swearing and threatening the teacher with harm and threatening their family members with harm. Upon arrival at the office, the student continued to have their violent reaction in front of a few parents, other staff members, and the vice principal. The teacher explained why they had escorted the students to the office, and then also explained why they needed to leave to collect themselves and to return to start their next class within minutes. On the way back in the hallway, the student who had run and hid in the bathroom ran through the hallway and verbally assaulted the teacher by shouting at them with profanities and ran away. The teacher was shaken and scared and went back to the office to report the additional incident. And when returning to the office, noticed that the first student was no longer in the vice principal's office, asked where that student was. That student had already been returned to class without consequence or conversation. The teacher then requested in writing to have a conference with these students before any further re-entry. That was denied, or nothing was said back to this particular staff member, and there were little to no consequences given.
At yet another site, another different work site. This year, a student is consistently expressing their needs, communicating their needs through dysregulation and screaming that is lasting for hours on end. A few weeks ago, this screaming endured for over 3 hours, along with destroying the classroom. Classmates were removed to a different space, a room clear. Eventually, the student moved into the school library where the escalation continued in full view of the entire rest of the school. Especially impacted were the multiple groups of kids in their library special that rotated through that space for those 3 hours. Kids were emotionally impacted, as were staff. The students screamed until they were unconscious from exhaustion. Admin monitored the student during the entirety of that escalation. However, they stated that they would not call home because that would be giving the student what they wanted. So instead, they waited until the student was calm, and only then did admin call parents to describe the incident as a hiccup during the school day. During other escalations for this same student this year, admin has coached the teacher to not label the removal of students as a room clear, but rather just taking a break. This lack of transparency with guardians and the teacher is preventing staff and the family from meeting the needs of the student, which is resulting in constant reoccurrence of this same situation.
At another work site this year, a student threw a stool at a staff member, punched her several times, and then stuck their hand up between her legs when she had a dress on. Admin tried to remove the student, but the student wouldn't leave the library, so the student remained under a table reading books for the remainder of the day. Admin called the parents and no further action was taken, the staff continue to feel unsafe and afraid in this situation.
In terms of inconsistent discipline practices, in 1 week at the same site, student A was running around the playground hitting students with a stick and was suspended. Student B had a consistent behavior of choking students on the playground, screaming curse words at children and staff, running away from staff, engaging in unsafe behavior like throwing chairs and hitting other people. In a specific incident with the same student in the cafeteria, they were asked by a teacher to move back to their table. The student became extremely aggressive towards the teacher. I'm going to use abbreviations here out of respect for the room. The student shouted, "Do you want to fight with me? I have a big D and I'll F you with it. Suck my D, you N-word. F you, mother effer," making sexual gestures towards her with a banana. The consequences for this student was to write a letter of apology, and the parents were called.
I have an example around policies for conduct. At one work site, staff have been urging the administration for clear and enforceable policies around various behaviors. Finally, in March, administration relented and offered a tardy policy. And the policy has actually lowered the incidence of tardiness successfully.
At a football game last year, a student was violently attacked. The game had just ended and no admin stayed beyond the game time. Approximately 200 people remained on the field when the assault took place. The principal was notified that night by coaches, and the victim's parents received a phone call on Saturday asking how the student was. 2 days later, the victim's parents met with admin where they were informed that 2 other verbal threats on the victim's life were made previously to the attack and nothing was done. Despite sharing classes with the attacker, the victim's family was told that they could move schools to keep their child safe, but that the violent attacker would not be asked to move or even have their schedule changed. Teachers of both students were never made aware of the attack or threats.
Of course, these are just some examples. We have more, but the language that we're proposing promotes staff and student safety. We know that the behavior is communication from our students, as Elizabeth stated, and that they're telling us that they're not being supported. And we don't blame students for these events. We're holding the district responsible for not addressing their broken systems.
Does everybody have Article 9 in front of them? Okay, I'm going to talk through our language. Much of this is very similar to our earlier proposal. Starting with the student conduct plan, there's actually several pieces in there that have been mutually agreed upon. I'll call your attention about halfway down, we're just changing school to work sites, just to be a little bit more inclusive of other programs and things that may not be identified as a school, just as a broader term. And then we are reasserting, in the next sentence down, reasserting the phrase "in writing" when seeking input for the conduct plan, just to ensure equity for all staff members in providing that input, and making sure that there are concrete ways for that input to be delivered. And then the last sentence there again is mutually agreed upon language. We again are splitting student disruption and imminent threat into 2 different sections because we feel like that they are addressing 2 different situations. Student disruption is just that, it's a disruption, while imminent threat is about safety. It's a different type of behavior, and so we wanted to address them separately. We did accept the word extremely in front of disrupted behavior. to add that qualifier there, so everybody's on the same page about the types of behavior. And then we changed up the sentence at the bottom. It was, we said that you had to breathe in real deeply to read the entire sentence that was that paragraph. So we changed the structure of the sentence. It's still the same. And then we added the sentence at the end that says, if in their judgment, a room clear is necessary, a bargaining unit member may initiate said room clear to prevent the further escalation of extremely disruptive behavior. And again, that word extremely, we just want to make sure that it's very clear what options are available to both our staff and administrators. Then moving on to the link.
Would you like questions as we go, or do you want me to wait until we?
If you, actually, yes, Brian, go ahead and give me a question as we go.
Okay, just curious, on this section, obviously we had differences in our proposals because you guys broke out the imminent threat from the disruption. So recognizing that, one of the things that we had proposed was rather than send the student or students, we added that language to seek assistance to escort the students. I see you picked that up in the imminent threat. I read ahead, sorry. But it's not here. And so I'm just curious, if we had like a relatively young student or even a secondary student who was highly escalated, the information that our team is giving me is we wouldn't simply release that student into the hall and say, away you go. We would ask for some level of assistance for them to be escorted. And people who know more about this than I do can certainly chime in. But I'm wondering if do we have a disagreement about that?
Yeah, so the difference there that we're seeing is imminent threat is a safety issue. Oh my goodness, this student is doing something that is inherently unsafe. And so we're calling that out as a separate type of behavior that needs an escort. Good job reading ahead. Whereas with disruptive, the best thing to do is just to remove that student from the environment to prevent further disruption in the class. So we're seeing it as a safety issue, more just like my response in this moment is just to maintain behavior in my classroom versus safety of students and staff.
Okay, not necessarily trying to be argumentative, but that's still not kind of getting at a part of my question, especially if we had a relatively young student. I mean, the language as written contemplates us sending them off to the designated location in the school. Would you not still have somebody escort them to that location? And I don't know, building folks who know more than I do, please chime in here, but I guess I'm still confused on that.
I mean, absolutely. I don't think I would ever encourage a teacher to just send a student. Typically when you tell a student, go to the, go to the office or whatever, that's going to elevate them and they're going to be upset. In addition, I think you're creating a situation for the front office. You may or may not be able to get a hold of admin immediately for whatever reason, to potentially have 1, 2, 3, or 4 students there in the office and not being able to support them. So I agree.
I would add I appreciate the examples, and some of the examples I heard were hallway disruptions and restroom disruptions. And we've seen situations where a student who is disruptive in the classroom may not choose to go directly to the office and may also become a disruption in the hallway or restroom. So also building upon the concerns that we also heard, want to alleviate those for the safety of the entire building.
We'll continue to discuss your question in caucus and get back to you. But my initial response to this is that we have several examples where a request is made for a administrator to come to the classroom to help support and escort a student that are ignored. So relying on that doesn't seem to work.
Okay, so one concern with our language would be if I ask for assistance to have a student escorted and there's nobody there to respond to that, now that kind of leaves me in a predicament.
Yeah,
right?
I think that you're feeling what we're feeling at that point, Brian. But we'll continue to discuss it and get back to you if my team has further comments on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on to that imminent threat paragraph, which is on the top of page 2. And again, Brian stole my thunder a little bit. We did keep that language in there about asking for an escort. We did at the very end make an allowance for if the room clear is necessary to keep staff and students safe, and that accompaniment, that escort has not arrived in a reasonable period of time, that they are able to initiate room clear. Moving on to administrative support. So I want to address, I think, A and C, and then I'll get to B, because I think A and C have some elements that we want to make sure are very, very, very well understood, and it's a common theme between the two of them. First of all, with referrals, and we talked about this at when we presented this article about the variety of referral systems, tracker systems, other mechanisms of keeping record of behaviors that exist across the district. And so we want to make sure that if a member feels that a referral is necessary, they can write a referral. What we're seeing is that administrators in certain buildings are gatekeeping that process, are denying that process, are gaslighting, I think is not too strong of a word at all, and telling members that's not really a referral, just put it in the tracker and I will decide what to do with that information. And I think what's happening with that, as well as data around room clears, we heard Elizabeth share a story about referring to a room clear as just a break for students. And I think what we're doing is we are ignoring the stories, the experiences of our students, which in turn is preventing us from addressing the root problems, right? We're not able to see true patterns. We're not able to see what is actually happening. And that is hamstringing us from serving students. It's preventing us from holding students accountable. It's preventing us from doing what we need to do to get to way upstream so that we're not having these students show up and do these things in school. So we want to be very, very clear that we need members to be able to hold that responsibility. We need there to be systems that are standardized so that everybody has a place to report things like referrals and room clears, and that we are able to look at that data with honesty and clear eyes so that we can make adjustments and serve our students. So that is A and C. For section B, go right ahead, Brian.
My own lack of knowledge about how things work. Is writing a referral synonymous with sending a student to the designated location in a building, or can one happen without the other? You know, because we talked earlier in this article about when in my judgment a student's being extremely disruptive or an imminent threat, I can send them somewhere.
Such a great question. I would say no. And one counterexample that I'll give you is, for example, if we have a repeated very low level behavior that keeps happening and happening and happening and happening, and maybe on the 35th time, it's time for a referral, but that's not going to necessitate a removal of a student or an imminent threat. Another one, plagiarism or cheating on a test. I'm not going to kick a student out for that, but that might lead to a referral.
Those examples help. Thank you.
Sure.
Lindsay, I have a question. This is the right time. You said tracker, filling out a tracker. What is a tracker?
Oh, Joanna, it depends on who you ask. That is my understanding.
Well, what does it do? Like, what's the purpose of it? Is that an elementary thing? Predominantly an elementary. And it tracks behavior? Like
Yeah, so historically, I think when we refer to a tracker, we refer to a mechanism where we can report on a low-level student behavior that needs to be noted, so that we can track spaces that are having maybe ongoing problems. We can track repeated student behaviors. Tracker is tracking so that we can then find solutions to problems that we've been able to establish patterns over a course of time or with the student.
And the difference between a tracker and a referral is that the consequence component. A tracker doesn't necessarily mean I'm an administrator talking to a student about the behavior and issuing a consequence. what a referral would mean that process takes place. Is that correct?
That is my understanding of the difference between a tracker and a referral, yes.
And I do want to emphasize, as I mentioned earlier, it is different from building to building. Yeah, thank you for that question. So section B there is just the reentry conversation. We have added some text at the end there to further clarify what we mean by that conversation and who is present at that conversation.
One question about that I had the first time and didn't ask. So if a student is removed, if I'm looking at the second line, this process would kick in. It says after a student has been removed or after a room clear. So it might be a removal under student disruption or a removal under imminent threat. Both of those scenarios would trigger the necessity of this reentry conversation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along. Actually, I think I'm done because the rest of those are just the bargaining unit number changes.
Lindsay, I have a question about the room clear piece. Just trying to make the logistics work out in my mind. So in my experience at the elementary level, sometimes there might be a room clear, and then the student who is escalated, it becomes regulated and the class is able to return. And I'm just trying to fit the physical logistics of a reentry conversation there. Is it presumed that we would then remove that previously escalated student from the group and then have a reentry conversation? Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Susan, I'm going to say I want to talk about that a little bit with our caucus and get back to you on that. Anything else on Article 9? Any other questions?
I just wanted to clarify what, I kind of think I know what you mean by the work site, or you're trying to be more inclusive, or you talking about specialized programs, or you talking about CT, what do you?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, it's anywhere where students are present, right? So a work site. We wanted to just expand the definition. We do that with our own reps. Because not everything is technically a school. For example, Terra Nova is a program, not necessarily a school in the strictest definition. So we want to make sure that we're capturing places like that.
But it's wherever a student is present. Yeah.
Would that be? Pretty sure.
I have a clarifier on page 3 at the top. Are you guys gonna propose a addition for the exact? I don't see that.
Wait, where? Sorry. Sorry, Janine, can you tell me where?
Yeah,
Is
The parties will negotiate a form which will be incorporated into the contract or as Appendix X.
Yeah, did you have a
yes.
suggested form?
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Sorry. That took me a while to get to. I apologize. Yeah, I think that's something else that we'll talk about in caucus and get back to you to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah, I just didn't see it in here.
Yep.
Okay.
I have a question about when you refer to a district maintained form, what does that mean? Or it's mentioned a couple times in this article.
Cool. We're gonna, we'll get back to you. I don't know who asked that question. We'll get back. Thank you, Lori. We'll get back to you after caucus with that answer.
Then on the agenda, you said you had other questions?
We do.
Oh.
So first I want to say, I appreciate how thorough you guys were in your explanation and rationale on the articles that you presented today. We did not feel that same clarity and rationale the last time, which has prompted quite a few questions for Article 12 specifically. Because while we understand that your proposal of Article 12 is in conjunction with the MOU for Appendix J, there was a significant amount of language that we proposed within the rest of the article that either we missed your rationale on or you completely ignored it, which I have to say was frustrating. So a few of my questions.
Can you hold just
Yep.
1 second, because
Yep.
I'm gonna try and get there. Are you gonna be mostly referring, you think, to your proposal in Article 12?
Yeah, and I'll go through all of my questions and how they lay out with our counter last time. Yeah,
All right, thanks.
just tell me when you're ready.
There's not well organized.
Right. Okay, so the first question I have is in reference to the definitions. We didn't hear any rationale for why you rejected our additional definitions as we laid them out in our counter.
Are you gonna go through all your questions?
If you would prefer I do, I can totally do that. Okay. The next one that we had also in that definitions part, we had language about limiting involuntary transfers. We know that transfers aren't good for kids. We often ask students about there being a staff member that they feel safe and comfortable with. And when transfers are happening for people repeatedly over the course of a short period of time, that removes those people from their learning environment equals bad. So we're wondering if you guys have a number that you think is reasonable for involuntary transfers within 3 years.
Are you, Suzanne, can you point me at a
Yeah.
spot on your?
Yeah, so I'm on, let me find it. It's A3. The
Oh,
added
thank you.
yeah.
No, thank you.
Our next question is in, well, it's kind of, I guess, referenced in two different places in their proposal, C4 and F5. We propose language using a plan of mentorship language, and we didn't hear a response about your opposition to that. The next several are in fact about the job expo. So I'm going to skip to stay in this article. I'm just going to skip down to, no, it's H. We asked about putting professional development plans in writing, but we didn't hear a response to that. And then in I, it appears as though you have rejected all of the language for assistance that members would receive when involuntarily transferred. And I guess our team is just really hoping that in order for us to be able to respond with something, that we understand your objection to it, that would just be helpful.
Sure.
The other question specific to the job expo, so that would be the MOU. Sorry, Susan.
Just, I'm following you where you went to I,
Yep.
but I missed when you said H. I thought you said it's about BD and I don't see that.
I think it's
Did I miss?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's in the MOU. Apologies.
Okay,
We'll go to the job expo on that one.
okay,
It's in
just trying to track.
I3. It's the writing.
Oh, no, Susan, I'm
Crossed out H.
the change in our lettering has confused me. So, okay, so get to page 6. Oh, it's on page 7 in the old one, sorry. And it's number 3. So it's the new I assistance. Number 3, when bargaining unit members are transferred to a new school, it's that section that I'm talking about. Sorry.
So I got that one, but then there was a different one that said putting it in writing. Is that the one where you talk about putting it in writing? Okay, so I must have missed the one after that. Okay, I'm lost, but we have a great reporter.
Yeah.
So I'm sure she'll orient me and copy.
So Susan, to try to be more clear, one of them was about putting the professional development plans in writing. The other one was about all of the assistance that we proposed for staff when they are involuntarily transferred. Those were the two final ones.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
In regards to the job expo itself, In some research that we did for comparable districts, we discovered that those districts start the staffing process as early as January. And almost every district posts and hires before we do. Hillsborough in April, North Clackamas in mid-March, and Eugene in mid-April. We're just confused about why Beaverton staffing, it appears to be more complicated than those other districts, hence why they're beating us to the hiring process. Another question that we had was that in conversations with BSD, it's been indicated that you guys want to shift the hiring process to be earlier. We want that too. We know that that is the best process, or we know that that very best educators are hired early. So why can't we commit to a date that is earlier to be able to start that process? We're also wondering, maybe a little bit similar, what are the roadblocks that you guys see that make agreeing to deadlines a hardship? Is there a specific part of the process that gives you pause? Our members feel completely in the dark about a timeline. We also want to point out that our strategic plan says that a foundational building block is to attract, support, and retain a high quality and diverse workforce. And how do we do that when those people have already accepted jobs in other districts? We're also curious why you're expecting that it's going to take 5 years of piloting the Job Expo in order to codify the process. Those are our questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think we're probably after caucus, we'd be ready to engage in a more thorough conversation of this whole piece. I think we share a lot of the same objectives out of this, like being able to attract, good candidates. We know that timing is a big part of that. People do tend to get hired early in that hiring season. So I think we share that goal. So, but yeah, definitely, I think a good thorough conversation on this one will be no problem.
Okay.
Just one sort of question to your question.
Yeah.
On the plan of mentorship versus plan of awareness.
Mhm.
I don't know, are those are capitalized. So are those titles that are used in like the evaluation handbook or system?
I don't know where they live. This is probably a better question for our HR.
Yeah, yes, I'm thinking that, I suppose.
Plan of awareness is a title of an element within our processes and timelines. Plan of mentorship is a new suggestion.
Right,
Yeah.
correct.
But would replace that as,
Right.
I suppose, a title.
Is it primarily a preference in what the connotation of that is or how that sounds? Or, I mean, I don't remember so if you're repeating yourselves, I apologize, but can you tell me a little bit more?
I'm happy to repeat myself for that one. So it was twofold. Number one is very superficial, which is they're the same acronym. So it's POA. The second one, which is a little more substantial, is that the plan of awareness, we felt that it wasn't really descriptive of what was actually happening. So we were thinking of this is a way we're supporting members, a way we're letting members know, hey, there's some concerns, here are all the supports, because what it really is a supportive plan. So we were just playing around with some words that would be better descriptor instead of the word awareness, and mentorship is what we landed on for that.
Okay, so not necessarily a change in how those, what would be plans of mentorship operate as compared to the current plan of awareness, but a title change.
Exactly, correct,
In and of itself.
correct.
Got it.
Wasn't there some confusion at one point around a plan for mentorship in this context versus new teacher mentors? I thought there was a little bit of a.
I remember you guys bringing that up, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna respond. I don't know that we're married to the word mentorship. The idea of not having two systems with the same POS, right? So that there's more clarity for our members with either one, as well as a title that is better representative of the work that happens in that process.
Okay, we'll put some thought into that as well. I'm sure we can come up with something.
Oh, did I say POS? I
Yeah,
apologize.
we actually talked about plan of
Sorry.
support, but the abbreviation was POS, which we felt
Sorry, was not appropriate.
could do better.
Sorry.
Why?
Yeah.
Let's talk later.
And Janine, those are all of the questions that we have. So
Lori was slow to get up.
sorry.
You gotta get out that.
Yeah.
Before we leave this topic, I just want to say thank you for the questions and the thoughtfulness. And we probably should have led with this because the last time we left, we barely gave Erica time to just get through sending you our proposal. And so we really didn't have the typical Q&A that we normally would have. So I'm really thankful to get these questions and to be able to have that discussion back and forth. Thanks for that.
So caucus time, how much time do we all need?
I would say at least 45 minutes.
Yeah, then we can check in and see
Yeah.
where things are at.
And when I say 45 minutes, Janine, maybe 40, because that'll take us to an even 2 o'clock. It's an easy number to remember to kind of check in on.
Okay.
Just check it and see that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you. Before we start, I just kind of want to give you some of the things that we have ready and then maybe I'll give it to you in a second. So Emily has a question about Article 4, and then we have answers to your questions around Article 9. And then we're also prepared to counter Article 6. And I just want you to know, knowing that it's 3:13 at this moment in time, my team is open to staying so that we can get all of the business that both teams have come ready to pass. So that we can get all of that done before our next meeting on April 4th. So we're open to staying so we can get everything concluded today. Not the whole contract, but wishful thinking, but today's work. I'm just putting that out there because I haven't even heard what you guys are ready with.
Okay.
So.
Am I starting or? Yes. No, Susan's here. Okay, sorry, Susan. Okay. Hi. So we reviewed the proposal for 4 and we have one comment and one question. I'll start with the question first. So if you turn to page 8, or actually, no. In our proposal, yeah. It's the proposal we're looking at. Yeah. So I know. So when we looked at your counter for Article 4, when I don't have the page number right, thank you. You were the best.
Remember those.
You should. So on page 5, I just wanted to make sure we had the same understanding of the role of the form in the grievance. If we had a very literal reading, it could be construed as the form and only the form triggers the grievance. However, we have a concern about PDF accessibility. Not everyone can edit a PDF, not everyone has access to Adobe Pro, not everyone wants to print something out and write like hand scribble their grievance in. So if you guys are comfortable with understanding that the form can also be information contained in the form, we're fine with that as well. But we wanted to make sure before we countered that where your heads were at on that.
Like, it's not the actual this that's being filled out.
Yeah.
I think the key would be that it's all of the things that are on this.
That's what we have practiced. I mean, that is actually the current practice in the district right now, but I wasn't sure if there was an intent to alter the current practice. So I just wanted to keep that.
To me, especially at that level 1, where the principal is now going to be receiving the grievance in a written form, they would need to know the information.
The information is what's the most important.
Yeah.
Okay, then I think we actually do have a counter for 4 then.
Oh, great.
Yeah, let's do it. So we were encouraged by all the progress that we have made on this article already. That was very, very happy to see it.
Great.
So in the attempt to sort of meet you in the middle, we heard so if you look at A1B, we hear your concerns about both probationary teachers. That was not our intent. We know that it were possible. We are not trying to remove the probationary period at all. And one thing that's overlooked in the way this language currently writes, which actually doesn't align with Article 5's language, is the concept that not everyone in the bargaining unit is under FDAB.
Sure.
And so would it not be a reasonable compromise to say, well, if you're not under FDAB, why not let their terminations be subject, or non-renewals rather, be subject to arbitration? Because they're guaranteed just cause, but what good is that just cause if you can't enforce it through the grievance procedure and you're not under FDAB?
Just looking at Article 5 real quick. I see what you're saying, where it says current language is employees not covered by the fair dismissal law. Have that just cause protection.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think I agree with your logic.
Thank you. That's all I have to say on 4. Are there any questions?
Is the rest of it, are there
I
differences?
do not believe there are any substantial edits otherwise.
Okay. Great, we may be really close on this one. We may be there on this one, but I'd like to talk about it. But,
Yeah,
I think,
Okay, so then next we have some answers to your questions in Article 9. Starting with Janine.
Yeah, okay, on that escort, that talking about students being escorted to, right? And to Veronica's point, sometimes it's not the best place to send a student to the office. You noted that if you're not in, the admin's not in the office, or, they're out about in the building, that might not be the best place. Current practice, students are moving about the schools, right? We're not talking about sending a student who's completely dysregulated out on their own, right? We're talking about, having like students escorted who need to have an escort, right? So I think what I'd like to say is that we do have principals who are barely keeping their nose above the waterline. Just, they're struggling with their buildings. So yeah, you're right. Don't send them to the office if that's not the appropriate place for the baby to go. Then we would want to have a system in place to receive these dysregulated students so that they have a place and they have personnel that are trained and ready to accept them. So that way, that's something that Beaverton School District leadership could do. T&L, I think that would be welcomed by building principals. It would definitely be welcomed by the students and definitely be welcomed by the teachers. The teachers can continue teaching and the child would be taken care of. So I'm just going to kind of push it back in your way, saying, hey, Beaverton School District, let's get a system in place that supports our building principals, our teachers, and our students so that they're getting adequate support.
Thanks, Janine.
I'll take question number 2, which had to do with the re-entry question and the wonderment if it was a requirement before a student was allowed back into class. The way that our language reads does not actually require that conversation. It says upon request by the bargaining unit member or administrator or designee, that after a student has been removed or after a room clear, that the administrator shall schedule a re-entry conversation. More importantly, though, is thinking about best practices, about why the student was removed in the first place. It would be our intention that if a student was removed for a violent action, for example, we would hope that the consequence would involve that wouldn't be a 30-minute consequence and they would be immediately back into the room in the first place. Therefore, allowing for some time to take place to schedule this reentry conversation, which would be appropriate and really probably needed for the trauma that's been caused in that classroom or that learning space. But for situations where a student just simply needs to calm down, they were removed for that reason, for their own protection or de-escalation. Certainly being able to come back into that learning environment, we don't want to prevent students from learning, could definitely be something that they can do without having a re-entry conversation right then and there. But it would also be appropriate then for later on to have that conversation with the student about why did this happen and what are we going to do to prevent it next time, and those kinds of conversations. So our language does not require that this takes place before, but our intent would be, let's use best judgment and best practices about the reason for the removal and the need for our members and our students to have these conversations sometimes before they are let back into a room and sometimes not.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think you already sort of touched on this, but so I'm looking at line 2 where it says the administration shall schedule a reentry conversation. So could they potentially be scheduling that for 4 days from now and the students back in class?
Again, if that was appropriate to the reason for why the student was removed, yes. And hopefully because our language is asking for it says in the, upon request from the bargaining unit member, or administrator designee, that conversation would take place as to what it is that's hoped for, right? If the bargaining unit member is saying, you know, this is what happened, there was this very violent action, et cetera, I'm really needing for this conversation to happen before this child can come back in, that would be responded and listened to. But also that if the member says, you know, this child just needs an opportunity to calm down, and if we have an opportunity to talk about this, you know, with their, you know, when the behavioral and wellness team is available on Thursday, great. So hopefully it's a collaborative effort.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up on the first response there. I appreciate hearing that alternative locations may be advisable, and I believe we have existing wording that supports that says or a designated place for the balance of the class period. The original question, though, is really I'm trying to reconcile the examples that were shared about hallway behavior, just disruptive behavior in hallways or in the restrooms, with the intentional removal of calling for an escort to the office. And that's why I'm still struggling with connecting the opportunity for a student who is extremely disruptive for the contract from the classroom, trusting them to make it on their own to the office or designated place.
Okay, yeah, all right. You're right. What is the designated place? And that's my point. My point is what I'm hearing from our members is that there really isn't a system put in place so that, what is that designated place? It's nebulous. Is it the office? Does it happens in the hallway, happens in the classroom, happens in the bathroom? Where is that student sent? It's an absence of a system. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a system in place and there was no question about it? If the student is acting in such a way that is disruptive in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the classroom, they're asking for help. That's what that student is saying. I need help. So what is our system and how are our buildings being supported to receive that student? What does that look like? And that's why I'm kind of pushing it back out there, because there really isn't a system, right? We don't have a system in place or enough personnel in place to be able to take this work on. And that's not something that we can solve from our end. That is a Beaverton School District, something you have to solve as administrators. Does that answer your question?
It doesn't, but maybe I'm not understanding. Maybe I'm not connecting it. My question is why are we removing the language of an escort when we send a student out of the classroom?
Okay, we're not removing the escort, right? There are times when an escort is necessary. We're not sending a student out, a student who's completely, utterly dysregulated out into the hall and say, may the force be with you to find your way to wherever this place is. What's happening is that when teachers are calling for help or when they are looking for an escort, that's in absence of a system. There's no system in place because what's happening in real time in the school is people are grabbing whoever they can to help that kid get to wherever that place is designated in that particular school. What I'm saying is that, isn't this a great time? Because these are our students who we're seeing later in high school. You know that, right? We want to help them in elementary and middle school so we don't see them in our re-engagement program. We want them engaged by high school for sure. And so isn't this a great time for the district to come together and really look at what kind of system can we put together so when this thing happens, that there is something to receive them? And maybe I'm not understanding. I see this gap. I see a gap.
Let me have Elizabeth try to speak to this a little bit, because I think that the original question was very specific to our littles, which would be in elementary school. So as Elizabeth is one of those, thank you.
So I think what I'm hearing is, how can we trust a little to make it to said designated place? Is that kind of the question there? Without somebody to help get them there?
Yeah, and my
Yeah.
question is secondary as well. That's my experience in
Sure.
picture situations, but across the board.
Right, and I can't speak to secondary, but for elementary, we send littles into hallways to navigate on their own all the time, every day, to go to the bathroom. My specific example for a student that's not at the level of imminent threat, but is dysregulated and upset, I will send them to our wellness room, for example. And I will radio or call the wellness room, is there somebody there? There is, excellent, I'm gonna send little Tommy down to you, they'll be there in 2 minutes. That is a regular occurrence in the school day. It's already common practice, it's safe practice. We send kids that are not so escalated that they can't be trusted or they're not safe or they're gonna hurt themselves or others. But certainly students that are upset and need a private place to regulate and calm down. That happens every day. Does that answer the question? For elementary?
I think it helps. Thank you.
Sorry for this.
No, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
We have 2 more clarifying
I was just gonna wonder, so for schools that do have systems to receive and help intervene with students who are disruptive, dysregulated, to have them sent to the hallway to find their way there. I wonder about, do we wonder about the safety of that time? It's not a systems question, it's there, but the student is now asked to move from the classroom and told to go to engage with the systems that are in place. That period of time there, I think there's some safety concerns there.
If I heard right, and shut me up if I didn't, Elizabeth answered that. So if a student can get themselves to point A to point B, and in some cases, I think, if they're not so discombobulated that actually adding a person will escalate them, right? Would escalate the student, they can get from point A to point B, that's fine. When they can't, yeah, we need help. But we already heard that we have teachers that are not getting the help because when they are calling for an escort. That's why, okay, if we have systems in place, a system in place that is working, right? Then I would say, this is a great time for y'all to inventory your current efforts. What's working, what's not working? How can we replicate this? How can we support this? How can we make sure that we don't have schools where there's a kid that's dysregulated that's in the classroom throwing chairs and they don't have anybody to take them to the office and it has to push to a room clear.
I think, sorry.
No, I was actually going to say something that might cut off conversation, so please go ahead.
I think that the key point is notification. Maybe not calling for an expert because that's not always the case. I know that at my school, we have a system in place. And oftentimes the notification comes through the radio and I myself respond, okay, have the teacher send the student to such and such place. So the student is already, in his pathway or her pathway to, their pathway to the location that is designed for it. But I think notification is important because a little one or a bigger one can be, emotional. And oftentimes in secondary at least, they go to the restroom and they go to the restroom to wash their face, they're crying or whatever it is, the kid might find solace in a specific place. And my worry is, kids, it's a problem when I don't know where you're at. It's a problem. I need to know where you're at all of the time. So I need to know that they left such classroom and they're coming to such location. So maybe just talking about the word notification, so that we know who's out of the classroom and where they're going.
So we would actually welcome a counter proposal that is sensitive to the realities we've described today, especially and also what you described, because that sounds pretty sane. So we would welcome a counter that actually talks about that, or is something that's flexible enough to not hamstring a teacher to make them, to put them in the position of waiting for help that may never arrive.
Yeah, and I wonder about where the language can live as well. Because we do have a system right now, which is the, school-wide student behavior framework. And within that framework, we have a section that says student removal and what that looks like. And that's collaboratively developed by everyone in the building, right? And I really appreciated the addition of the language of reviewing it in the middle of the year. I actually welcome it to be reviewed even more often or as needed, right? Like right now, this is happening in my building. And the reason that I emphasize on where it lives is because every building is so different. And every year is so different. And it can be different from the spring, from the fall to the spring. And there could be things that happen, student dynamics that evolve. And you're like, all of a sudden we have this in front of us and we need to figure this situation out. And this needs to be modified for that need. So I also wonder, like, because there's so many nuances to a student extreme behavior and the removal process. There's so many detailed, intricate nuances within that that is specific to a building, like I said, that living somewhere where it's more adaptable seems more appropriate to me.
I hear you. And again, we welcome a counter, but I want to reiterate that while system you've described sounds great, it is not a consistent practice throughout the district. And it is that consistency and a sort of minimum standard and a minimum level of staff autonomy that we also need to guarantee in the contract. So we welcome a counter that balances those two things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Interject for a second. We are unable to stay till 4 today. I mean, past 4. Number. So we need to finish at 4 o'clock today.
Okay.
And then I think a clarifier for Article 4. You said, you know, you're that's what we had on there and gave a counter. What about the appendix?
That is forthcoming. Not today, but
Not today.
yeah, that will be forthcoming. Yeah.
All right, so.
Thank you.
Do you want us then to counter 6?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
I do have one more answer.
Oh, I apologize. We have a couple more answers to your questions. Sorry.
Okay.
Jump in the.
Hello, one of the questions I was asked was, what we meant by a district maintained form. And it is exactly that, a form maintained by the district. We obviously, as it says in there, want to help to create that form. There's already one that exists specifically for referrals, that I think is a very good starting place. But that is something that we want to be housed within districts' electronic infrastructure, so that it's easily accessible by any employees. And then the same would go for the form for room clears. Again, we'd love to be, we want to be involved in that process, in creating that form and developing it, but it would be something that is maintained by BSD.
Like in synergy or?
That would be, I think, Lori, that would be part of the negotiation, like where, like as we develop that form, where does it live? What does it say? How do folks access it? All of that, all of those details.
Lindsay, did you just say there's a form that already exists?
But here's what's real, Joanna. I searched referral form in the intranet and found a form. I don't know how long or how old it is, but there's something that exists. I've never seen it before. So there's something there somewhere. And then,
And then there was one last question about the trackers versus referrals. And I think one of the ways that we have thought about to easily distinguish them, trackers, they go to your BH&W team to help support the kiddo, to make sure that, hey, what supports can we give? A referral is, I'm referring this student to administration because whatever has occurred at that point, administration needs to be involved.
Please let me know if we missed a question.
It was clarified.
Okay, thank you. So then next we have a counter to 6. Whenever you're ready, Leslie. Sorry.
Everyone has a copy. First, compliments. We appreciated your use of the word community members rather than citizens. We agreed that that was much more inclusive, and we appreciate that change.
Great.
So thank you. We accept that wholeheartedly. And Brian, we hear you loud and clear about the nexus of personal time and professional duties. And we agree with you. We agree with you with the examples that you provided, as we hear that you agreed with us with the examples we provided last time. What we would also note, though, is that our proposal did not include reference to or the words off-duty hours or on-duty time. We gave no time qualifiers because we don't intend to give any time qualifiers. We do not believe that there are times where we won't be held accountable for our actions. The examples you provided, we feel are accounted for within the scope of TSPC licensure, our staff code of conduct, and criminal law. So within those purviews, we are countering with the following language that you see here. Only complaints related to the execution of a member's professional duties from parents, community members, or staff of the district, et cetera, so on and so forth. So we feel that that still encompasses all of the concerns that we had, as well as the concerns that you had, given the other, what might the word be, the other things that are in place that guide our conduct.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you for that counter proposal.
Okay.
That's it. That's what we got. Thank you.
We have some responses to 12, but we can get into that. So we're just gonna do that.
And I'm gonna go through some of your answers on 12, all the answers on 12, and I invite my team members to chime in if they have things to add. First, I want to start by saying we did look through your proposal of 12 and really considered all of the recommendations that you shared with us. So we did really have a good effort of looking to see what we would really consider in our proposal. And so let's just get started and look at, I'm looking through your proposal here. I'm just going to answer some of the questions. The first one, I think you asked about the involuntary transfers. You asked, I think, how many years or what would we consider if we were not accepting your original proposal. We found that that was not acceptable for us to accept your proposal because the main goal of our staffing process is to make sure that all of our, of course, probationary and contracted educators have a job. And so there are times when we are working through the staffing process when we're faced with dilemmas. And one of the dilemmas could be, right, due to licensure or a variety of things, is an individual who has been transferred before and then trying to find a spot for them. So we would rather initiate another transfer than to look at layoffs. So potentially that's what we could do. Be looking at layoffs if we were to follow the not more than once every 3 academic years, we could not transfer someone. So that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that all educators have a position within our district that are owed. And that was why that was problematic for us to accept that language there. The second piece you asked about definitions of why we did not consider or accept any of your definitions. And as a team, when we read through the information, we found that they were not just definitions. They also had mandates attached to them. So the first one, the survey, let's see, the first one is FTE allocations. You define that the number of positions are allocated, but then the second piece of these are communicated to the association and all administrators in writing. So some of the other definitions, not just definitions, but they had mandates attached to that. And so that's why we rejected those pieces there. Going down to some other, you talked about like dates, why we would accept particular dates. And so wherever you see in your proposal that there is a prescribed date, because our system and how we do our staffing is so complex, there are times where those dates aren't able to be met. And BEA leadership knows that when we have those dates, there are a lot of times where we need to gather together and create an MOU because that target is not attainable. So therefore, we tried to put in markers in our proposal because we understand that you need to know where certain things happen. So for example, one of them is the expo. We said we crossed out no later than May 1st, but we wanted to provide you with some sort of timeline where you can note where things would happen. So that's why we proposed language like before the official start of the general external posting. That is something that you know. You know when we're posting positions out into everyone that we have staffed everyone in the district. So I just wanted to say that with all of the dates that are there, it's hard for us to agree to some of those dates. The second one up on page 2, where you talked about, and I think this is all centered around why we're hiring so late or why things happen. The staffing process is not just siloed with HR. With our district, there are many things that happen before HR gets the allocations and we start to staff. It's a district-wide process. And it has so many different variables. It has our business office in it. It has our demographer that does enrollments and things of that nature. So there's just a wide variety of individuals that provide information and action items that need to take place before we actually get to the allocations and the staffing and the placing. So you asked about the timeline and why we're so late. Those are different variables that kind of dictate when we do certain things within the staffing process. Mike, I don't know if you wanted to say a piece about the fiscal piece that we wait on as well.
Yeah, you know, when you think about a long session of the legislature and uncertain funding and those kinds of things, that's where we tend to stretch our timelines a little longer because we want certainty, right? The more closer to certainty we can get, the less anxiety we put through the entire system. So you'll see that occasionally. Again, this isn't a year like this year wouldn't be that, right? Like we're in the middle of a biennium, things are fairly predictable. So, you know, from that standpoint, we're not too bad this year. But there are years and years in my career where going early may force us to broaden the net and you know, come up with some early decisions being conservative where we're going to change it in 2 months or 3 months because the legislature came through or a certain funding bill passed or, you know, whatever the case may be. There are reasons that going earlier doesn't always benefit, we don't think, district staff. That makes sense.
And there are times where we have gone early because you're right, we want to attract the best for the best. And we've had to redo certain things and then it impacts shared assignments. And we all want to know that educators want to know their assignment before they leave. So that's why dates just impact that a lot. Let's see, another one on 4, you asked about the plan of mentorship. We had a long discussion in our caucus, and I think here too, the word mentorship kind of threw people off because it means other things within our district. And if you want to counter with something, another word that you think that would work for that, we're amenable to that. Let's see, some of the others were, I think, a piece about the, I think that's I with the assistants. This one we reviewed in our caucus, and the reason why we structured that proposal is that we feel that that would be a significant cost to us with that piece of if notified of the transfer by the last student contact day, then we will receive 1 day of extended contact. So that's why we did not include that one in there. The other one, the piece about on 3, it's on the last page on 7. When transferred to a new school, we talked about that in our caucus, and we're okay if you want to propose that. We'll look at that if you include that in your proposal.
Can you repeat for me what part?
It is 3. It is I 3.
Thank you.
The writing.
It says the plan will be
thank you.
available in writing upon request. Yeah. I guess we didn't really have any hard and fast objection to that. We didn't know if it needed to be formalized to that level, but I mean, I don't know that we have a huge disagreement with that. I mean, the rest of the language is current language just being moved from somewhere else. We weren't, as we talked, we weren't aware of this happening all that often, and I don't know if you guys are. But our administrators weren't familiar with this PD plan being utilized when we had people that were moved, but maybe that we're just not thinking of.
I can only answer that I do know that it has happened. So in instances where members recognize their rights that are already written within the contract of change in their position. So yes, I
And as far as
give you specifics
as
now.
that being available in writing by the member or the association, I mean, can you help me a little bit? I guess I can guess as to why the association would want to see those plans. Is there any particular reason why? Just want to check and see how things are operating.
Yes, it's contract enforcement, yes.
And I think kind of the last one was really a question of why are we hiring so late? We really want diverse candidates. And we have with our priority hires have hired earlier this year than ever before. And that is our goal. We see similar eye to eye on that particular goal. And so we have made strides and efforts to change so that we are going out earlier in hiring. And that is evident to this day right now, what we're doing with our priority hires. We kind of looked at the, because we always want to be competitive with other districts. We looked at several of our neighboring districts to make sure that we're not out on an island. And schools like Wilsonville, they do their hiring around the same time. Hillsborough, March to April, and Laco, like the end of May or so. So they do their hiring and a staffing process where they share assignments around the same time that we do. I know that was.
Jump in a little bit on that one. So I just want to say that there are two pieces when you talk about hiring timelines. One is when do we start hiring? And the second one is when do all of our current employees know their assignment for next year? And those are not necessarily the same. So sometimes when you hear Portland Public is hiring in February or Hillsborough is hiring in March, we are too. People are just talking because we are doing early hires and we have many, many years. So we are hiring, but the real question that really impacts the staffing process is when are we able to tell and confirm those assignments for next year? And so we've sort of sent our feelers out to verify that with other districts to see if we're kind of in the same ballpark with that. The size of our district and the number of options we have with option schools and things and licensure does create complexity. But from what we have heard from our peer districts, they're very similar. Some of them are last day of contract, some of them are May, some of them are April, but it's in the general ballpark of where we typically live.
Can you,
that helps?
Susan, can you restate that last sentence that you said that it, in comparison to the districts that you just mentioned, our
timeline for notifying our staff, our current staff of their assignment for next year, we have had variance, and the variance has always been tied to fiscal and budgetary volatility. But typically it ranges from April, usually it's April and May. I can remember a year in recent times where we went into July. I remember that vividly. It was 2020. But typically it's in April or May that we can notify our current teachers and educators their assignment.
And then that's what starts the ball rolling with hiring, with external hiring.
Okay.
And that's where the hiring gets complicated, because if you're talking about your hiring season that is all the external hiring, that's late in Beaverton, and in other districts, I might add. But if you're talking about really getting started with early hiring, we're all doing that as well.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Susan?
Sorry,
May I ask a clarifying question
of course.
or fair warning?
What if she said no?
I would say, I'm so sorry, you're about to hear something, but I think we all are invested in civility here, so. When you said notify them of their placement, would it matter to you that a lot of districts in the surrounding areas don't necessarily make a distinction between internal and external candidates?
You mean for hiring?
Yes, for when new positions are posted. I mean, that's a wrinkle that we were looking through. Like, for example, let's see, like, for example, North Clackamas, there's no internal process, so postings go live at the same time to all audiences by mid-March usually. Or in Westland, transfer requests are made by February, in their window of February 2nd or January 2nd to February 2nd. And if the member is not on the transfer list by February 1st, they are treated as an external candidate when a licensed position is posted. They're usually posted and filled by mid-May. And let's see here. Stuff like that, those sort of distinctions. And I believe that there's sort of a, let's see, what is the deadline? I believe Hillsborough might have a similar.
It's really
insight on
similar
that.
to that. They've got an
Yeah.
internal transfer
Yeah.
window where you can ask for a transfer, not necessarily in response to an open position, but
Yeah,
hey, I just want to be considered for a transfer. I think
Right.
that might early February or like
Exactly.
February 15th or something.
precisely, yeah. I
Yeah,
think you're right.
and anything beyond that, it's applying for an opening the same way that an external, like.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure we're having an apples to apples comparison here.
I think I missed the clarifying question. Yeah.
The clarifying question was, I believe what you were talking about was when people know their placement. So they know their assignment for next year. And I'm saying, yeah, but it's also important to know that when you talk about their timelines, which you should confirm, absolutely. It's important to know that they don't necessarily have similar internal, external posting processes as well. So would that complicate how you felt or interpreted that information that you received?
Okay, so I don't know that there's a question there, but I appreciate the conversation about that. And I just want to acknowledge that I think we all understand that many years ago, Beaverton did away with any difference between internal and external as well. And then the only recent change to that is the job expo for internal candidates, right? We're all on that same page. Thank you.
I think that concludes everything that we've got. Or not.
So as far as we're meeting again next week, right? I'm not the board. So, when we get back to you about what we're gonna bring, because we have a chance to let their team meeting next week.
Yes.
Do you have what you're gonna bring, or do you know? Yeah.
No.
No.
I do have one question that we asked, and maybe I missed it, that I want to ask, and maybe Erica, you were the one who was answering questions to our 12 questions. Can you give me a little bit more about why you guys are expecting it to be 5 years before all of those pieces to the job expo, you think would then be, I guess, well enough known to actually memorialize in our contract?
We talked about that, and I shared that at the last one when I shared the proposal, was that we've only really had 1 year of the job expo this last year. And so there's so many factors, financial things of that nature, that we want to continue to test the job expo to make sure that it is appropriate, what we want, works for members, works for our operational features and everything. So we wanted to be able to continue to, not to pilot it, because we've already done that, but to continue to refine it and work through it before it is solidified in an actual article.
Thank you.
Included?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.